Hello and welcome to Backlisted, the podcast which gives new life to old books. Today you find us in the living room of a small flat above a tailor's shop in Cork Street in London. It's a winter's night in 1924, with a strong smell of cabbage. On a large divan piled with cushions and dolls, there sits an awkward, startled-looking teenage boy holding a large photograph album. From the tiny bedroom there emerges a slim, pretty girl with blonde hair dressed in nothing but pink shoes and stockings, held up by pink garters decorated with blue roses. She's holding a small towel. I'm John Mitchinson, publisher of Unbound, where people pledge to support the books they really want to read.
And I'm Andy Miller, the author of The Year of Reading Dangerously. And today we are joined by a very special guest making his Backlisted debut.
Indeed.
The actor and writer and director, Rupert Everett.
Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Welcome, Rupert.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming to this small room that smells of cabbage.
Yeah, I'm right there. So that, of course, is a moment in The Moon's a Balloon. And, of course, for today's audience, it's a rather shocking
It is.
idea because David Niven, at the age of what,
14
13 or 14, started following
Nessie,
a young girl with wonderful legs, down the streets of Mayfair. For weeks, and finally she turned around and said, "What you want?" And he didn't really
He had
understand.
no idea what he was doing. Yeah.
And up he went to her little flat and had his first shag, dare I say it.
And in that moment, he invented stalking.
Right. So there's two things that are absolutely unacceptable in today's world: stalking and underage sex.
Yeah, and bang, straight in there, but also brilliant soundtrack. Do you remember the record that she puts on to put him at ease?
Oh, yes, We Have No Bananas.
Yes, we have. Which he says, although he said she had a ready wit, he thought that was just a coincidence that she hadn't put it in to, as it were, get him in the mood. But hey.
I before we get before we dig into this, I haven't even introduced you yet. Rupert. I apologise. Rupert has appeared in film and TV productions, including Napoleon, My Policeman, Adult Material, The Serpent Queen, Funny Woman, An Ideal Husband, and My Best Friend's Wedding. His stage work includes Another Country, The Vortex, Pygmalion, Amadeus, The Judas Kiss. His first memoir, Red Carpets and Other Banana Skins, was a Sunday Times bestseller, and its sequel, Vanished Years, won the Sheridan Morley Prize for biography. His documentary series, Love for Sale, won the Grierson Award, and his film of Oscar Wilde's later years, The Happy Prince, was released in 2018 to widespread acclaim. And you wrote, I've got my notes there here, your book about the making of that film, The End of the World, was the first book I read on public transport at the end of COVID.
So you got back on public transport?
I sat always
in your mask,
also wanting something sensational to read in the train. I took your book with me. So that book, apart from being a wonderful book about a fantastic film, a wonderful book about the difficulties of making that film, also is now seared into my memory as kind of like
something to do with COVID.
Yes, I'm so sorry. Yes, you're right.
Okay.
And your latest collection, The American No, is a collection of autobiographical stories. Rachel Cook, a regular guest here on Backlisted, wrote in her review in The Observer that the collection showed that, quote, nothing and no one escapes his attention. However wasteful and capricious his first profession, we know that he is perfectly safe. The blank page will henceforth always be his. He is a writer to his aching bones.
That's heady wine to drink,
isn't it?
And
she's. Let's be honest, Rachel isn't a pushover.
No, she's not. I was thrilled by that.
I was going to say, do you read your reviews, or is that the first time you've heard that?
No, I like to kind of hear about them from other people, really, because they're too. You get shingles otherwise every time you read about yourself. But normally you can find someone who'll say it was very good, and then you can have a little peek.
Also, could you? John and I were talking when we met earlier the stories in the book are. I was going to ask you whether they had been collected over a long period of time, or whether you had a deadline to meet, or how you did. But they're not, are they? They were inspired by.
Well, the inspirations for the story happened. They're just 7 of the millions of stories I've pitched over the years in my slightly impotent desperation to keep going in the screen trade. So I wrote up about 12 of them, and these are the 7 I thought were good for a book. But no, I only wrote them from, I don't know, a couple of years ago I started writing.
But can you tell there's a wonderful introduction to the book? I mean, there are 2 things I wanted to say. It would be great to explain the title just briefly, because it's a great title, and even better when you know why.
The American No is a title, a phrase coined by my great friend, a producer called Robert Fox, and he has a kind of very good but slightly gallows-ish sense of humour, and we've all noticed over the years. Pitching is such a peculiar thing in show business. You go in with your idea. There's a group of people. In America, there's normally a bigger group of people, and they're weird types of meetings because no one wants them to go badly, obviously, and most people's ideas probably are rather bad. But so there's a kind of egging on. Everyone's looking at you, hoping for the next punchline, and it goes terribly well, and you have to, you learn how to do it. And normally when you leave, inside everyone's breathing this huge sigh of relief, but outside they're going, "We love you here at Bottomley Bay Productions. You're the perfect fit. We want Rupert Everett." And you leave walking on air. You fire everybody because you think everything's going to, suddenly come up roses. And then, of course, you never hear another word.
Okay.
And that is called The American No.
Okay.
That's brilliant. And you also, the genesis of the book is you're sitting in a place we all know well, Bar Italia in Soho.
Yeah.
And the Hare Krishnas, as they still do. It's one of the few
I
things
saw them
about
yesterday.
Soho
They're still there. They're the only thing that's still there.
And one of them peels off, and he is a producer, an old producer friend.
That I knew from a pitch, and who turned me down a couple of years ago with his boss. And his boss, who was a kind of whiz kid, had left the studio they were in and gone to work with another even better kind of person. And this poor guy, my friend, who's actually a wonderful executive and a very great taste and everything, he was just kind of thrown on the trash heap, because show business is a ruthless mistress. And there he was, galumping along behind the conga line to Nirvana.
And he suggested that you should think about writing your scripts as stories.
No, he didn't suggest that. What he suggested, and it was incredibly touching, and it kind of it gave me that kind of brain fart that took me on to the next step, which is what's so lovely in life when people inadvertently help you out. He just said, you've really got something.
Yeah.
And, there he was, almost a homeless person. So to be told by that person, you've really got something, keep going.
Don't give up.
It just felt wonderful and life-enhancing. And I noticed what amazing eyes he had, which I'd never noticed before, and they were covered in rain because it was raining, and it was just one of those moments that was very beautiful. And then he left, and after that I thought, God, they are good, my ideas. He's right. And what am I going to do about it? And then I thought, oh well, rather than churn out another memoir that's going to be from 9:30 this morning till 5 o'clock tonight, because I've kind of done everything else, I thought I'll try and write some of these stories down. At least they'll then have some kind of
Krishna, yes. The American
the
No
Krishna,
versus
yes.
the Krishna,
Yeah,
yes.
exactly.
That's wonderful.
And they are, I have to say, they are wonderful. You were talking about Happy Prince, but there's a sort of version of that, your Oscar in here, in the Sebastian Melmoth story in the American No. Which I
that one was the only one that I wrote before, actually, because once I got started on the idea, which I had with Roger Michel, the director, who's now sadly dead, he then said, go off and write a few pages of it and see what the tone is going to be like. So I did, and so that's the only story I really wrote back in the day. And of course, it was just the beginning of a very, very long journey, because then Roger backed out.
Yeah.
And I went on alone. But no, I'm pleased to have written them, and I think I understand a little bit more why often they didn't go so well with executives.
I've got a question. So we recorded an episode of Backlisted a couple of years ago about De Profundis by Oscar Wilde, and we also recorded a Christmas special, because that's what we do on this podcast, about À la recherche du temps perdu by Proust.
Oh,
yes,
really?
imagine
Oh my
entertaining
God.
people
Happy
over
Christmas.
over the festive season with that. But there's a story in here, isn't there? There's a Proust story in here.
The script of it's kind of what taken from Swan's Way.
Well, it was the first episode of what was going to be 7 or 8 episodes of Proust. And I was commissioned. Well, I wasn't commissioned. I made a great mistake, because most people in show business, they say, no, show me the money first and then I'll go and do it. And I've always thought that's a rather mean-spirited way of going, vulgar way of going about things. And I said to them, listen, I really don't know if I can write this, because, it's such a big thing. Why don't I just go away and try it? And then when I know I can, we'll do a deal. And they said, fine. And then I, spent months reading, racking my brain, writing. And then I rang one of the producers up and said, listen, I think I've got it. I've written the script. And he said, I'd love to hear your ideas. I said, my ideas? No, I've written the script. And this is another kind of, I don't think this isn't the right time to do it for us now. No. So,
oh, God.
There we go. C'est la vie.
Anyway, that's the closing. It's the closing story in the book in script form. It's wonderful. Well, we should get on to the matter in hand, shouldn't we?
Yes.
If you hadn't already guessed, we're here to discuss what Andy and I have long considered to be the most entertaining book ever written. It's come up on this podcast at various occasions over the years, and we never felt we'd quite found the right moment to do it. But this surely is it. It is The Moon's a Balloon, the memoir of the British actor David Niven.
This is the point at which Rupert says, I didn't come here to talk about that. What are you...
I came to talk about me.
First published by Hamish Hamilton in 1971, it sold at least 5 million copies and probably been lent at about 15 million copies, and set the standard for actors' memoirs for generations to come. Few have ever matched Niven's ability to combine hilarious, telling anecdotes about the golden age of Hollywood with unsentimental and sometimes deeply moving accounts of his own life. Moving from his school days as a bright but unsettled schoolboy who lost his virginity at 14, as we've already know, to Nessie, a Piccadilly whore, to the tedium of his time in the Highland Light Infantry through various failed money-making schemes he tries in Depression-era New York, until he finally lands a small role in Hollywood. The book is rich in anecdote and buoyed up by Niven's seemingly bottomless enthusiasm for company, for high life, for telling anecdotes and the sauciest sides.
Once Niven hits the Hollywood years, the roll call of cameos becomes almost absurd in its star quality. Fishing with Clark Gable, cricketing with Ronald Colman, playing tennis with Charlie Chaplin, hanging out with Errol Flynn, Douglas Fairbanks and Humphrey Bogart, flirting and rather more with the leading ladies of the era, Merle Oberon, Ava Gardner, Rita Hayworth, Grace Kelly, Marlene Dietrich, Elizabeth Taylor, and on. Such is Niven's charm that when he rejoins the British Army to fight in the Second World War, he becomes friendly with, yes, Churchill, who takes him into his confidence and discusses the finer points of the Allied strategy. Despite all this, as subsequent biographies have revealed, Niven isn't altogether honest with his readers. There were darker currents running beneath the golden surface of his life. And how far this hidden narrative contributed to the fascination the book has exerted is something we will be discussing with Rupert. Has its charm lasted? Does it still seem, as The Guardian recently voted it, the #1 Hollywood memoir of all time? For this and lots more name-dropping, keep listening, everyone. But first, here's a message from our sponsors.
How many discounts does USAA Auto Insurance offer? Too many to say here. Multi-vehicle discount, safe driver discount, new vehicle discount, storage discount, legacy.
How many discounts will you stack up? Visit USAA.com/auto discounts. Restrictions apply.
Whatever the occasion, effortless elegance is right this way. Because Hilton brings you new ways to stay courtesy of the Nomad London. And it doesn't stop at award-winning dining in a space draped in velvet and illuminated by vintage chandeliers. No, this day goes beyond with unparalleled personalized service and attentive hospitality. Oh, and did we mention the Nomad London can be booked using your Hilton Honors points at Hilton.com? Hilton, for this day.
The new McCrispy Strip is here. Dip approved by ketchup, tangy barbecue, honey mustard, Sprite, McFlurry, Big Mac sauce, double dipped in buffalo and ranch, more ranch, and creamy chili McCrispy Strip Dip. Now at McDonald's. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
And we're back. Rupert, let me start with the usual question for Backlisted guests. Where were you? Who were you? What were you doing when either you first became aware of David Niven or you first read The Moon's a Balloon?
Very easy question. I first became aware of David Niven watching Wuthering Heights, starring Laurence Olivier and Merle Oberon in, I should say, 1972 or 3. Mm-hmm. In those days, those glorious days when television on a Sunday used to have old movies. And there I discovered
rainy
everything.
Sunday afternoons.
Betty Davis, Merle Oberon, Laurence Olivier. And I remember that film. I remember Olivier doing a brilliant thing with his hands on a broken window and cutting his wrists. And I was enraptured, not so much by David Niven. I didn't really notice him, really. And then my parents had bought The Moon's a Balloon, so that must have been 1972, 1973. And it was along with Jacqueline Suzanne novels on our shelf. Yeah. And I read all of them.
Valley of the Dolls.
Valley of the Dolls, one of the great books, by the way. And I read all of those books together. And I think immediately, I was already hell-bent on show business, but I was also hell-bent on a show business that didn't exist. I loved, that world of the 1930s.
We're just going to show that cover because I think if you're of a certain age, my memory, Rupert, is that everybody's parents had copies of Alistair Cook's America, the World Atlas of Cheeses, and The Moon's a Balloon, right?
Every holiday cottage you ever stay in has
got it. Yeah, every ice cream shack with the book spinner had a copy of that. And as John was saying, this sold how many copies in the 70s?
Well, they say it sold 5 million, but I don't think anybody really knows because it's been re-released by Penguin, and I think it's still. I looked the other day, and I think that even that sold 20,000 copies of the re-releases. It's one of those books that is genuine kind of backlist gold, and I think also it really was the first. I mean, it was the first kind of memoir of its kind that maybe everything was kind of coming together. The interview culture was coming together. Parkinson. All of that sort of celebrity stuff was coming together in a way.
I think you're right. I don't think there really is one before that because, of course, everything in show business in those days, we forget that in these days where everybody sells something, be it shampoo or fashion. But in those days, it was very, very rigorous.
Strict.
You were kept in the movies and that was it. So I think he must have been a precursor of things, really, writing that book.
He's about 60 when he writes it. And therefore his audience and he are in, not retirement exactly, but they're reaching a point in their lives to look back. Yeah. And as you suggest, John, Parkinson, of course, in the 70s is now such a rich archive because of all the Hollywood stars who were doing the final lap of honour.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And so you have people like Niven and James Stewart and whoever was available because that was in living memory. I wonder, Rupert, then can you remember when you first read the book, or can you remember reading it in places where you may have read it?
I would have read both of them at home at my family's in Essex when I was about 15, I should think.
Okay.
Both books in the holidays and they provided. I didn't really understand him in the same way that I then began to understand him later, because looking back on the whole thing now, he makes much more sense to me. I mean, the weirdness of his face, the weirdness of that kind of sexiness, which is completely unwatchable to us, really, because it's a kind of charm,
distinctly unbuff. Kind of
very unbuff, very weird. I was watching him before coming here on the Dick Cavett show, and his face with that weird little moustache and the replumbed teeth, and also when you look at things like the first Pink Panther movies, he's quite. I mean, he really is what we would now consider lecherous, slightly, and he's really, he so is the generation of our fathers and mothers, and that kind of raconteurishness.
Well, we'll come on to the raconteurishness is a specific thing I want to ask you about, but maybe you could tell us then. he's funny looking. He embodies a type that perhaps we would, as you suggested at the start of the show, we would think twice now about celebrating. As a screen actor, what has he got? What's he good at?
Well, his greatest moment was obviously Separate Tables, when he played the Major in Terence Rattigan's adapted play. He was...
For which he wins an Oscar,
For which he wins the Oscar. And he was good in it. He doesn't have... which he does as a writer. He doesn't have emotional depth so much as a performer.
Interesting.
Although he's got in Separate Tables, he's got a dignity and he is that's him at his very best. But he is an army officer essentially. That's turned to acting, and so I think he made a lot with a little, in a way, which is a great thing.
Because he curiously isn't a character actor like a lot of the Brits in Hollywood. Is he always seems to be David Niven in whatever, as you say, an army officer, Match of Life and Death.
But I think I think now looking at it that there's definitely a darker side to everything, and even in the story that we first discussed, in a typical Niven-esque way as a writer, the end of it is very tragic. You know, this girl just disappears. And she says, "I tell you, I'm going to get married one day and settle down," and that's it. He never hears from her, and so there's a wonderful bittersweetness about the end of the payoff of the story.
I mean, it's one of the things about the book. Going back to it, is it is, I think, exquisitely structured. I mean, he really, really is a good writer, and in a way that I mean, you know, if you're dealing with ghost-written actors' memoirs now, that doesn't happen very often. But that, as you say, the Nessie story, not only obviously he has a relationship with her, but they live together. He takes her to school, introduces her to the headmaster.
He said, doesn't he, at some point, he feels that he's loved, though.
Yes.
He feels he's loved. He has someone who cares enough about him to come and see him.
Because he terrible, rackety childhood. His dad dies in the First World War, and then he is sent to a selection of schools. He gets expelled from his first school, and then goes to this terrible Dickensian sort of crammer, which is run by this terrible alcoholic couple, and then ends up in Stowe, this incredible model new school. It's very good on English public school life.
So when you read it when you were young, presumably the thing that appealed was the sequel, Bring on the Empty Horses. Presumably what appealed at that point was the Hollywoodish
getting into Hollywood,
and in fact Hollywood arrives only halfway through The Moon's Balloon. But over the years, what are the writerly qualities that you feel Niven has that perhaps weren't visible at first?
Well, I think obviously the raconteur, the pass the portish type after dinner conversation thing that is not actually that easy to transcribe. He does that very well. Underneath that is this thing that you can't feel because it's not actually in the writing, but there is a darkness inside him, and there's kind of holes in the thing that actually serve a great purpose. You know, the story of Primmy, the first wife, it's all so light-hearted, but then suddenly, struck with tragedy, and you get a feeling of him. Well, he's a kind of. He's been through not been through the First World War, but been around it. He's just got he manages to keep carrying on, and the writing just takes you through it, and there's just something darker underneath it, I think.
Yeah.
I was going to say to you, Rupert, I've got the section here. I wonder whether you would be willing to read this blind for us.
Absolutely not.
From there, this is the section you were just talking about Primmy.
Oh, yes. Ty Power and Annabella gave a small party for Primmy that evening. John McClane had just arrived from New York, and all my closest friends were there. As I looked around at them and at Primmy's radiant face, I wondered how it was possible for one man to have so much. Nearly everyone was working the next day, which meant being up at 5 or 6 o'clock, so we had an early barbecue round the pool. Ty cooked. Afterwards, we went indoors and played some games. Someone suggested sardines, an old children's game played in the dark. I was hiding under a bed upstairs when I heard Ty calling me. "Come down quick, Primmy's had a fall." I rushed down. In the dark, she had opened a door, thinking it was a closet, but it was the door to the cellar, and she'd fallen down a dozen steps. She was lying unconscious on the floor. We dabbed her head with water, and she started moaning and moving a little. Within 20 minutes, the doctor had arrived, and within another half an hour, she was tucked in bed in hospital. "She's very concussed," the doctor told me after his examination, "but it's nothing to worry about. She'll have to stay absolutely quiet and in the dark for a few days, and she'll be fine." I went back to Ty's house and told everyone the good news. Then I went back to the Spanish house, and Pinky helped me pack up a few things Primmy might need, a couple of nighties, a toothbrush, some perfume. Back at the hospital, they repeated that she was fine and said there was no good I could do by staying and to go home. If I wanted to drop by before I went to work in the morning. I was back about 6 the next day. They let me see her. She looked beautiful but very pale. Her eyes were still closed. "She's had a good night," said the nurse. All during the day I called from the studio. "Nothing to worry about. It's a bad concussion. All she needs is complete rest and quiet." After work, I went back to the hospital. They were most reassuring. I sat with her for a long time, holding her hand. She was very still. Suddenly, she opened her eyes, looked right at me, smiled a tiny smile, and gave my hand a reassuring squeeze. Suddenly, she opened her eyes, looked right at me, smiled a tiny smile, and gave my hand a little reassuring squeeze. It was the first time she had recognized me. The matron said, "Why don't you go on home now and get some sleep yourself? There's nothing you can do. We'll call you at once, of course, if there's any change. Go on home and don't worry." Bob Coote was in the house when I got back, waiting for news. I told him everything was going along well, that no one was worried, and we raided the icebox for a snack. About 11 o'clock the phone rang. It was the doctor. "I think you better come down," he said. "There are certain symptoms we don't like. I've alerted the best brain surgeon there is. We may have to operate." Bob came with me. An hour later they started the operation. 2 hours passed before the doctors came down. I knew as soon as I saw them come out of the elevator. I knew by the way they walked. I knew by the way they stood murmuring together without looking at me as I waited across the hall. She was only 25. Very good.
Rereading that was wonderful. By the way,
Yeah.
rereading that, it reminded me, John, of the surgery scene in A Matter of Life and Death, which Niven has made literally a year before this takes place. Except there's no happy ending. There is no intercession. There is intervention. There is no heavenly messenger. And I don't know, Rupert, if you've ever listened to Niven's reading of this book.
I haven't.
It's an abridged audio.
Yeah.
But when he gets to this part, while he's reading, he cries while he's reading it.
Does he?
A bit like with the book itself, you're laughing. Oh, you're the raconteur. I'm charmed. I'm delighted. I'm laughing, and then you'll suddenly go, oh, "That's that." And there's another section. I recall it. Trubshaw, is it Trubshaw?
Oh,
Yeah.
Yes.
He's very moved. So this idea that it's all mediated. Clearly, some of it is mediated, but these are things that happen to him. That's the.
I mean, that's the thing. I was always intrigues me about memoir is you can't tell everything. I mean, if you're trying to, I just wondered if that's something in your own excellent writing of memoir.
Don't ask me these kinds of questions.
Niven is quite discreet. I mean, lots of the women who appear in the book, we now know that he had affairs with, but he doesn't write about the affairs because, presumably, some of them are still alive, and also because he doesn't want to upset his already quite difficult wife, the second wife, Hjordis, who he writes about with as much love and tenderness in this book as.
Well, of course, but that also, the writing about Hjordis is quite interesting because at a certain point in this book, she decides to leave him and goes and lives in another house. And he never goes into the reasons why, what's gone wrong. He's put it all down to himself that he's too keen on his career. And you don't quite, I don't know how it is that not knowing, you don't quite believe that's the whole story. And getting her back is so difficult, and you get a real picture of her as a kind of slight bitch already because she's always sitting on a sun chair when he comes round to her other house, having a perfectly nice time and a manicure and all this kind of stuff. Yes, it's interesting. There's a lot that's unsaid, and there's a lot that's exaggerated. I looked the story about him falling over at the Oscars and saying he was tanked. And then he said, I was the first actor who had actually admitted to being drunk. That's not how it was, because, of course, now you can watch the Oscars.
Yeah.
And he did say he was tanked up with good luck charms, but he didn't fall going up onto the stage. And he didn't stop after he said, I was tanked, and the whole audience burst into spontaneous applause like they did in the book.
But print the legend, Rupert. Print the legend.
No, but it's great.
I wonder whether... One of the things, as we know, The Moon's a Balloon was a great bestseller, Bring on the Empty Horses. One of the things Cary Grant said about David Niven's authorial career was he thought that Bring on the Empty Horses was a terrific book, apart from that the best stories in it had happened to him, not David Niven. So there is a kind of...
That's funny.
Yeah, right. We do a thing here on Backlisted where we judge, and I will ask you to be our judge today. Blurb, jacket copy.
Oh, jacket copy.
Right. So I've got here on my phone.
Do you write your jacket copy?
No, I don't.
Do you read it?
No, I'm not sure if I do. I mean, they ask you who you want for the quotations. They manage to.
Well, I've got the copy here that was attached to the first edition of the hardback of The Moon's a Balloon.
Oh, right.
So I will read that to you both, and then you tell me if on the basis of this...
You'd read the book.
You'd read the book, okay? David Niven has had one of the most varied lives, as well as one of the most spectacular film careers of our time. His father was killed in the First World War, and later his mother, reduced to poverty, remarried a man whom David cordially detested. He was bullied at prep school, expelled, sent to a corrective school, refused communications with his mother, and when he finally went to an establishment where he was happy, he was caught cheating with painful results. This isn't how I'd open it, but okay. Meanwhile, he had got a reputation as a humorist, which anyone who has seen his films will know that he has kept up. As a result, what might have been a Dickensian tale of woe and tribulation becomes a hilarious account of schoolboy adventures. At Stowe, which he loved, he distinguished himself as an athlete. Meanwhile, Nessie, the golden-hearted oar, they dropped the H and the WH there, had given him his first experience of sex and proved a loyal as well as a presentable ally. Welcomed by the headmaster of Stowe, she was to prove the precursor of a career as fabulous as that of Casanova. Wow. In the Highland Light Infantry, David meets the legendary Trubshaw, a man after his heart, and together they enliven events in Malta. When Trubshaw left the army, David also threw in his hand and sailed for Canada. In America, where he was treated with endearing hospitality, he became a bootlegger, an organizer of indoor pony races, and finally, through a piece of luck which would seem impossible if it were not true, he sailed his way into Hollywood studios and starred from 1935 to 1939. His wartime experiences, he served with the legendary Phantom, are treated with characteristic modesty, and thereafter his return to Hollywood leads to a rather checkered career, including being fired by Goldwyn and winning an Oscar, and also to the greatest tragedy of his life, the death of his beautiful 25-year-old wife Primmy through an accident, leaving him with 2 small sons. In due course, he remarries the lovely Swedish model Hjördis, and they adopt 2 little girls. Spoilers. This is the whole plot. I was going to say, this is one of the most amusing, outspoken, self-revealing, warm-hearted and touching biographies which has come our way for a long time.
I like that a lot. I think it's good. I mean, they're much longer than today's ones. Yeah. And you wouldn't...
They had a lot of flap to fill in those days.
No,
as it were.
As it were. No, I think it's a nice one. I like it.
Do you?
Do you not?
No.
Oh, I think it's good.
It's so windy, and it leaves... I would, if were I writing the blurb for it,
go on.
I would definitely go Hollywood, 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 Hollywood at the top. This is the story of one man's unlikely path to, and bring it back round again.
Right. Okay.
Not that I intend to go back through time and give notes.
I mean, that's the whole story's in there.
Yes, right. But John, do they do that because they're saying if you buy this book, you'll get sex?
I wonder.
War,
I don't know. I think I'm guessing. Okay, I might be wrong, but I'm guessing Christopher Sinclair Stevenson is at Hamish Hamilton at this point.
Oh, really? I was published by him once.
Yeah, I mean,
were your novels published?
Yes,
by him?
my first one was published by him.
Okay,
so quite high-minded. You know, Hamish Hamilton. So,
Right.
so I'm wondering if it would be too vulgar to put lots of lists of Hollywood stars in there.
And was it published first in the UK?
It was
would
published
be-
simultaneously in the UK and the States. I'll say a bit more about this after the break. When we come back, we will hear a couple of minutes of David Niven himself, the man himself, reading from his audiobook. So please come back and join us after we hear this word from our sponsors.
New Vitamin Water Zero Sugar Pineapple Passion Fruit is packed with vitamins. Just like the amount of peas we packed in that sentence. It's packed like your tote bag. The one you stole from your ex. Or your overpriced half a studio apartment. Or extra rushed rush hour traffic. Packed like your calendar. Triple booked at 5, of course. Grab a Vitamin Water. Did we mention it's packed with vitamins?
Finding a new job is stressful. But with Indeed, it doesn't have to be. Just fill out your Indeed profile with your skills, experience, and desired salary. The more you fill out, the better your matches will be. And hearing from hiring managers will be 2 times more likely. Relax. That's your Indeed profile sending opportunities your way. Indeed, the world can work better.
Switch to Verizon Business and get more from your internet without paying more for your internet. Get LTE Business Internet starting at $39 a month when paired with select business mobile plans. That's unlimited data, and with it, unlimited possibilities. Start saving today with Verizon Business, ranked #1 in small business internet customer satisfaction by J.D. Power. Starting price for 25 megabits per second LTE internet plan with smartphone plan savings, plus taxes, fees, and economic adjustment charge. Terms apply. For J.D. Power 2024 award information, visit jdpower.com/awards.
Are your business expenses playing hide and seek? With Uber for Business, the small spends that slip through the cracks, like rides and meals, go right where you need them. Because it integrates with leading expense platforms, you can say goodbye to surprise costs, missing dollars, or chasing receipts. Everything's track downable. Uber for Business. Make small steps that make a big impact. Learn more at uber.com/small steps.
Goulding kept his word. He really did try to help me. There are 22,000 extras, he said, looking for 800 jobs. You must have a good agent. So he talked to Bill Hawkes, an important man in that line, and I found myself with a representative. It was vitally important to have something on film, so I was delighted when I was given tests for various roles. But I was still a hopeless amateur, and in front of the camera I was still congealed with nerves. As the weeks went by, I changed from being a new face to being a face that's been around and hasn't made it. Invitations to the houses of the great became fewer. Tests no longer came my way, and it began horribly to dawn upon me that, after all, a movie career might be beyond my reach. Irving Thalberg had been the boy genius of Hollywood. Now, just in his mid-30s, he was the undisputed master producer of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. Production of his epic Mutiny on the Bounty was getting underway, and having been told by Goulding of my bizarre connection with his ship, Thalberg decided that as an additional drop in the publicity bucket, it might be worthwhile signing me up as one of the non-speaking mutineers. He happened to phrase it more glamorously at some Friday night gathering. I'm thinking of signing David Niven to a contract on Monday. That did it. The word went round. If the great Irving Thalberg was going to put me under contract, then I must be worth having. Goulding, striking while the iron was hot, fetched my original and only slightly relaxed test from the MGM studio vaults, put it in his car, and went directly to the house of Samuel Goldwyn, Hollywood's legendary producer. On Monday, Goldwyn sent for me. He sat behind a huge desk in a tastefully furnished office. He was almost entirely bald, very well dressed, with small, intense eyes set in a brown face. He was about 50 and looked extremely fit. He spoke without smiling in a strangely high-pitched voice. I'm giving you a 7-year contract, he said. I'll pay you very little. I won't put you in a Goldwyn picture till you've learned your job. Now you have a base. Go on out. Tell the studios you're under contract at Goldwyn. Do anything they offer you. Get experience. Work hard. And in a year or so, if you're any good, I might give you a role. Having a highly publicized contract with Goldwyn made it obvious that I was not about to parlay an invitation to dinner or tennis into an embarrassing hint for work. New doors were ajar. Then John McClane suddenly arrived from New York with a contract to write scripts for RKO, and my cup overflowed.
Well, there he is, the man himself, David Niven. I thought you might enjoy, after with his charming tones fresh in our ears, that you might enjoy this story. When The Moon's Bloom was first published in the UK, his editor, who is a man called George Greenfield, tells this story. This is reproduced in Sheridan Morley's biography, The Other Side of the Moon, The Life of David Niven. George Greenfield says, Hamish Hamilton gave him a party at the Savoy with all their editorial staff, but David knew very well that once a book was published, they didn't matter at all. The people he took,
so true.
The people he took the trouble to go round the room meeting individually were all the sales staff, and the people from W.H. Smith and the big bookshops. He used to sidle over to them once I'd pointed them out and say, look, you don't know me, and I'm sorry to interrupt your conversation, but I'm David Niven, and I've written this horrible little book which nobody wants, so please do try and sell it for me. And of course that worked wonderfully.
Right.
Yeah. So that idea of him performing David Niven, that comes over loud and clear when you read accounts of how the book was published. He was insecure. He was keen that everybody made as much money as they could, which is fair enough.
There's a lot about money in the book.
But he was he was taken aback with the fact it was an instant success.
Yeah.
One of those things in publishing, I think, John, where we don't really know why these things work. We can say after the event, otherwise we'd all be doing them all the time.
Right.
That something about the combination of Rupert, what do you think? Perhaps Niven's status as a not quite a superstar is the thing that makes him seem...
I think the age as well and the year. I think, the 70s is such a good time for a little bit tell-allishness. I think also he was the first, like we said before. There hadn't been much eye-openers into Hollywood up until then.
And he does the whole thing. That's the extraordinary thing, isn't it? From sort of late 20s right through to late 60s.
And covering also post-war people in the war who all read. I think that, the army in the war must have been very, very potent for him too.
But I wonder whether as well he's presenting himself to the reader as a participant. But he's not so starry and not so famous and not so wrapped up in how he delivers a performance that he doesn't also seem like an eyewitness.
Yes, and also because he's so self-deprecating for whatever reason, it makes him very approachable. He's not saying this was my greatest, performance, and he's demystifying a lot of things. Funnily enough, I thought when he got to the war, he loses the plot slightly when he gets to the Second World War. I found I got a bit bored. I didn't quite believe the endless walks with Churchill kind of slightly got me down in this second read.
That must have been so much more resonant. Exactly what we were saying. It's so much more resonant in the 1970s.
Oh, they must have loved it, because it was only 5 years after Churchill's funeral. All those people had all been in the war and understood it.
That's the thing. He's a peculiar kind of everyman, isn't he? He's not, as you say, Andy, he's not glitzy enough to be kind of one of the untouchables. He's the strange kind of affable army officer but who finds himself surrounded by all these extraordinary people, and because he's such a good storyteller, we sort of feel vaguely on his side through the whole way the book is written. I was going to ask you about the British in Hollywood, which is very interesting. Whether that was how that has changed, having been through, you've been through that yourself.
Well, one of the things he talks about, and I don't know whether this is true, but he says in this that everyone knew each other. It was obviously a much smaller world, and everyone was very supportive of each other.
Yeah.
And they all went to each other's premieres because they liked each other. I find that difficult. Maybe it was. I mean, it was a much smaller world, and he does make it look like Bing Crosby's looking out for him, and Fred Astaire's coming over to see if he's got any milk, and maybe they were like that. Anyway, it's a great picture, and certainly isn't like that anymore. But then the English were much more of a kind of foundation stone of early Hollywood, and the Cricket Club, which is also so beautifully written about by Evelyn Waugh in The Loved One, was this thing that you could really, you could fail in England at tons of things and get out there and somehow make a name for yourself. It's very compelling and very exciting.
Yeah, there's that whole mad bit where he's running that kind of strange racing thing, which I still can't imagine what this indoor racing.
Oh, the pony racing.
The pony racing.
Yeah,
completely mad. And they do it in Atlantic City, and the mafia close it down. It's
and that may well have happened.
Yeah.
Furthermore, or at least a version of it will have happened. I think he is tremendous company.
Yeah,
that's the thing. When you're reading a book like this, and I wonder, Rupert, with your memoirs, is this the voice in your head? Is this the foundational anecdotal voice?
Well, certainly when I started my first book, this was my role model. Somehow to be charming, bitchy up to a point, but not bitchy to the point where you alienate people and they say, "Oh, that's really horrible," or to try and make it look like it's all fun, I suppose. And I think that's what he does too. It does all seem not effortless, but it all kind of falls into place. And I think that's what people like seeing. They want to. I felt they wanted someone who. I think self-deprecation is always a good one to go for in a way, and it's quite manipulative in a way.
Alan Partridge says he doesn't like self-deprecation. True. But I'm very interested in this. To make it work like that on the page is difficult in my limited experience.
Very difficult.
Is it? And you're reaching for this easygoing, avuncular. Then the story just fell out of me.
Yeah, I don't think. I'm sure it didn't fall out of him. I think it's very organised writing, and certainly, I mean, not that I'm trying to. I wouldn't compare myself to his work because I think it's much more immediate. But I mean, in my experience, I had to work quite carefully. To make sure. A, it doesn't ramble on. B, it doesn't get technical to a point where people get bored. C, it has enough affection for the world, even if maybe you don't. I can't believe Niven's feeling about Hollywood. Well, he doesn't even. He says it wasn't. It all seems like a very affectionate journey, and it normally isn't. It's a difficult job to do, to keep going in show business, and it kind of gives you lots of different things happening. But I think It feels very affectionate towards everybody.
And when you were working on the first volume of memoirs, did you share those with anyone? Did you read them to see out loud to see if they were having that desired effect?
Well, no, I had a wonderful editor.
Hello, Antonia.
And not the first one actually.
No,
the first one was Justine Piggotty.
Yeah.
And she was a good editor too.
Very good.
And then we worked hard at kind of honing them down.
Yeah. John, I thought one of the things that was really is fascinating at this distance, but also I think helps Niven in how he presents himself in the book, is it's terribly helpful that he was part of the studio system where he was a contract player, which allows insights into how people were cast in films and how films got made, but also exactly what you were saying, Rupert, that idea that Fred Astaire was on the lot or he was sharing digs with a certain person who was also tied up to the same film studio. I mean, even then in the 70s, was that well known, that side of the business? It's hard to say.
I wouldn't know. No, I wouldn't have thought in the 30s and 40s they promoted that side of it very much.
I mean, it was all, the magazines were controlled. There was sort of Luella Parsons and
Hedda Hopper.
They were the whole way it was mediated was. I mean, I think that's the thing, that you do get the sense in the book of the control of the studios, and his famous kind of battle with Sam Goldwyn, which is great comedic value, but you can sense that the feeling of having everything, the floor disappearing, beneath his feet, that everything he stood for was in the gift of one human
man.
being. And
yes, here it is indeed.
No, and how you can blow it all very easily, and it can all go wrong.
Yeah, Goldwynisms have been so widely quoted. Include me out. A verbal. Actually, why am I reading this? You read.
Me. Okay.
Just read a little. Just read the opening paragraph. There. Thank you, Rupert.
No, Goldwynisms.
We'll use you well while you're here. Don't worry.
Goldwynisms have been so widely quoted. Include me out. A verbal contract is not worth the paper it's written on. And of a 14th century sundial, what will they think of next? Etc. That for a while I was suspicious that Goldwyn might foster that legend by dreaming up new ones for himself, but I don't believe this was the case. I heard him let loose many of them, but I think his mind was so far ahead of what he was saying that he left it to his tongue to take care of thoughts he left behind. That's funny. In fact, he had great dignity, but when thwarted, he tended to shout loudly.
I mean, he massively... Goldwyn hires him out to Powell and Pressburger to make a film called The Elusive Pimpernel, which I think we said on the show we made about Michael Powell is inexplicably awful.
Yeah, it's a terrible film.
And Niven behaves terribly badly, doesn't he? As a result of which Goldwyn fires him. And stories circulate about how difficult he is to work with and how arrogant he is. And he says in there, I must have been mad. I must have been mad.
And there you have the kind of thing that we then got used to later in the 80s and the 90s about, when we started discovering about actors being difficult and needy and demanding. And this is, you get it, but in a very kind of cushioned...
Well, if you think about it, in 1971, this is right at the beginning of New Hollywood. I mean, The Godfather's released the next year. That whole massive change in the way that movies are made, and the importance of directors, and the studio system is kind of disintegrating, and it's almost like he kind of comes in as this sort of affable, chummy, very trustworthy raconteur. And what I love about the book is he's as good about the Trubshaws and the masters at school, or the people that he meets that are not famous, as he is about the famous people. So I think that's partly why you believe his Hollywood anecdotes.
Because he gives such attention to the other ones.
He's earned your trust. Although it's interesting, isn't it? The second book, Bring on the Empty Horses, is almost all anecdotes about other people.
But you love that.
No, it's portraits. I think it's portraits of other people, and he's got a lot of more confidence as a writer by that time. He doesn't feel the need to drop names in the same way, and I think the portraits are absolutely amazing. Missy is my favourite one.
Missy, should we just find...
But I mean, don't you think he probably was I mean, it sounds to me like he was surprised by the ridiculous success that the book enjoyed. I mean, it's not that he's a modest person. He has enough vanity in him. Is it
Vivian Leigh?
Yeah.
I'm sure he knew it was going to be a success.
So when he's writing this book, John...
in Cap Ferrat or wherever he's living. Yeah,
he's taking whatever parts he's offered in films, and Backlisted listeners will like this particular story for several reasons. One of the films he's cast in is he's cast opposite Gina Lollobrigida by Jerzy Skolimowski in an adaptation of Vladimir Nabokov's novel King, Queen, Knave.
No.
Yes, early 70s, and it's filmed in Cologne. Now, operating in Cologne at that time is
get out of here.
The progressive rock group Can. labelled by the UK music press in the 1970s as krautrock, a classic one of the strangest, weirdest groups. And Can had contributed to the soundtrack of Jerzy Skolimowski's previous film, Deep End.
Oh, so they'd have seen each other.
So they're playing their first gig with their new singer, the Japanese man Damo Suzuki, in Cologne when they are filming King, Queen, Knave. And I will quote for you now Holger Chukai from Cannes, who reports that very first gig with Damo Suzuki. This is what he says. About 30 people were left, and one of them was David Niven. So I asked him, Mr. Niven, what did you think about this music? And he said, it wasn't great, but I didn't know it was music. I've managed to bring together Nabokov, krautrock, and David Niven in one anecdote. I'm happy.
Yeah, that's
brilliant.
amazing.
That's very good. And perfect Niven kind of.
Yes, charm, but kind of, yeah.
I mean, yeah, why he isn't Terry Thomas, is he? This is the thing about Niven. Although he has got that caddish kind of quality to him, he doesn't become a caricature in some strange way. He manages to have what you might call authenticity.
But there's a lot of Terry. There's a side to him that is Terry. I mean, the tragedy of Terry Thomas and the tragedy of Niven is that they are similar in a way that they have these fronts, and that behind them are these terrible things happening. I mean, he has to go and look after Missy for a weekend, and he's left with her for a weekend, and she goes bananas and tries to shag him non-stop, and eventually, I read the end. The pills did not seem to have much effect on Missy. She ate some cottage cheese around midnight, which contained a couple, and drank some wine, into which I had stirred a third. But they only slowed her down for an hour or two. Then she was as bright and demanding and as terrifyingly unpredictable as before. I dared not go to sleep for 5 minutes, and as the long days and interminable nights melded into each other, a dreadful thought began to assail me. That it was not Missy whose mind had become deranged, it was mine. I became a hollow-eyed zombie, sleepless and utterly exhausted. But Missy never showed any signs of tiredness and harried me endlessly to play hide-and-seek with her, to flatter her, to comfort her, to fight with her, or to go to bed with her.
Wow, that was wonderful.
Brilliant.
It's very good.
The sort of writing that seems effortless, but we know it's not.
No, it's not.
Right.
Experimenting with brightly coloured bikes.
Yes, I was thinking exactly that.
But I'm not sure you would quite get away with writing that in a memoir now in the same way. I mean, it's a very
in what way?
Well, because it's funny at first. I mean, it goes on being funny, even down to knocking her over as she's running around naked. And it's not funny. But so, yes, I agree.
But it's the effortless change that he's very good at that. He lures you in with the comedy and then sort of literally hits you over the head with the pain.
But again, it seems to me that's a very astute subversion of his strength. His strength is the charm, the anecdote, the laughter,
And also observing a lot, observing so well her weird premonition that something was going to go wrong, and painting a picture of her that makes her just so visible, although without a name.
I've got another question then about your experiences in Hollywood. What has changed? If you were to say, well, my Hollywood was this, which is not there anymore, what would it be?
My Hollywood was the hangover of the 70s. I arrived in the 80s, and the 70s had been such an extraordinary time, really, when the clowns were running the circus, so to speak. And there were, huge bowls of cocaine in the middle of boardroom meetings, and everyone was... it was a really magical time. By the time I got there, all those people were in rehab, and quite often the best way to get a job was to go to AA and tell some fabulous story.
That brilliant story of Cuddles Associates,
right?
Where the guy, you get a job in the mailroom of William Morris Agency,
and so my world was actually, the 80s look wonderful now in retrospect, but they were definitely a hangover from an amazing era. I mean, the 70s really was its own golden era in Hollywood, and they made so many amazing films there. And the 80s felt a little bit tawdry at the time. There was those teen directors like John Hughes. They weren't really very good movies, any of those movies. But then other things like Sissy Spacek, completely forgotten now. What a wonderful actress she was.
Amazing. Because what happens is 76, it's Jaws in 75 and Star Wars in 76, 77.
And Cabaret.
And then the whole of it becomes summer blockbusters, and the whole of the industry, but by the middle of the 80s is completely transformed again.
And also it was a kind of two-restaurant town when I got there. In between the 80s and now, then what happened in the 80s is they started publishing the box office receipts in the New York Times. And I think that was very much like Adam and Eve eating the apple. And it was a bad idea because as soon as the public...
Knowledge is a dangerous thing.
And this was like we were saying before about what did people know. But once they knew how much a film made and the grosses... everything became number one box office gross, which, it changed everything. And then political correctness came in at the end of the 80s, and you couldn't smoke unless you were the villain. And then it was on the move to something different.
I thought we might like to just hear this. This is a letter from David Niven to his publisher, Jamie Hamilton.
Yeah, from
while he's writing it. So let's assume that his ears are still ringing from seeing Cannes in Cologne, and he sat down the following morning, and this is what he writes to Jamie Hamilton. My dear Jamie, my so-called book is driving me mad. You do realise that, don't you? There are so many characters bobbing up, and they all seem suspiciously alike in the way I describe them. I need your advice. I ask for it shamelessly because if I ever finish the damn thing, I do want to offer you the first hack at saying no.
Oh, so he's writing it on spec.
Amazing.
The American no. I vacillate between being all buoyed up at the thought of writing a full autobiography, complete with, I hope, rather fascinating moments with some greats such as Jack Kennedy, Winston, and of course Flynn, Bogart, Gable, Garbo, Cooper, Sinatra and co, and feeling that it would become just another actor polishing his ego at the expense of those sort of people. Would it ever go into paperback? Would it be possible to write it as a novel? And while lacking the loss of direct confrontations with entertaining friends, make up to the reader by adding all sorts of little spicy and scandalous happenings that could not be mentioned in truth and would probably amuse a far larger public. I also feel that it is terribly conceited, unless one is a great statesman or author, to write a straight autobiography. SOS, please. Glorious weather. Love, David.
Interesting.
Isn't that interesting? He sort of covered many of the points we've talked about.
Right.
Well, it's like in the introduction bit he read, he that brilliant line that I adore, which is, it makes little sense to write about the butler if Chairman Mao was sitting down to dinner, kind of covering his arse from the accusations of ridiculous name dropping.
Tell me about...
And of course there he does it with the Missy story. He does exactly that.
Yeah.
Tell me about... I remember William Goldman in Adventures of the Screen Trade.
Yeah, wonderful.
Wonderful book, right? About, again, which we made an episode about. And he says in that, there's a brilliant bit where he says, when you see your favourite actor on a chat show, and they seem like just the greatest guy, and you think, wow, I'd like to hang out with them, I'd have a few beers and whatever. That is one of the things they are great at. That is their performance.
Oh, just making themselves look like...
Yes, making you feel like you are their friend or you're enjoying it. Now, Niven was clearly...
Yeah, the past master at that.
When you watch him, say, on the Parkinson clips, Parkinson does so little, really, except say, now, David, you were in Hollywood.
Well, that was really, and one of the very extraordinary things happened there. Well, no, amazing. He was a part, and also I don't think he. I mean, the thing is, you should never try and meet your heroes. They're always disappointing. They always end up looking kind of like one of those Hollywood sets. You open the front door and then you fall 15 feet into a trash heap. But I think he probably was quite fun to meet.
Yes.
Niven. Or maybe he wasn't. Maybe he was too concerned with, Hjordis having beaten him up the night before that he was too strained. And always worried about money, I think he was.
Massively. Well, that's one of the themes of the book, isn't it? That the money thing is, and he makes bad decisions sometimes, and then is also fortunate and catches a break. But I don't know. My hunch is that he is from the beginning immensely likable.
I think he's immensely likable. I think he's much more ambitious than he lets us see. Everything is quite considered. His whole career is much more thought out and much more. He's much more aggressive about it than we seem to see. Although, if you look carefully at the sequences when he fights with Goldwyn, you realise actually that he was the same old difficult, needy and pushy person as the other ones, probably.
And indeed, some of the reports in the biographies say that around publication, he was exactly that. He knew what he needed to do, which was be a pain in the arse to some people and an absolute delight to the ladies from W.H. Smith.
The editorial people are dead to me now. I'm going to talk. I'm going to talk to the sales team.
But also, there was the thing about money is true that they sold the. He's saying that will it ever go into paperback, do you think? Because certainly in that era, the paperback was where you made the real money, right? And I know his agent did a decent deal in the UK with Hamish Hamilton, but a lousy detail in the States.
Oh, really?
A deal in the States. Yeah, I mean, they sold the US rights for maybe £30,000. And Niven is absolutely furious and threatens to sack the agent. He's not. This is what's so funny. Under the guise of charm, Toodle Pip, he's not effing around.
But I it's hard to find. I tried to research this, but I think he gets a massive second wind of fame through the book. Yeah. I think by 1971 he's more or less a forgotten,
slightly washed up
in America. I mean, he might be. I mean, I think his reputation has always been slightly stronger in the UK anyway, because some of the films have become classics, and he had all that weird '60s Jules Verne stuff, which I'm not sure. I mean, I think that was a pretty big movie in
Around the World in
around
Mike Todd.
Around the World in 80 days.
And also Casino Royale. That was 70s, wasn't it?
He absolutely
68 60s.
Yeah. He gets a massive. He becomes an overnight star again because of the book and going on chat shows and being urbane and very funny and very approachable.
We need to wrap up in a minute, but I wonder if I could prevail upon you just to read one more bit, which is I wonder whether you could read us the introduction. We'll end with the introduction. So this is...
Oh, it's a great introduction, yes.
Yeah.
Evelyn Waugh penned these words. Only when one has lost all curiosity about the future has one reached the age to write an autobiography. It is daunting to consider the sudden wave of disillusionment that must have swept over such a brilliant man and caused him to write such balls.
That's the moment this is going to be a good book, isn't it?
That's true. Nearer the mark, it seems to me, is Professor John Kenneth Galbraith of Harvard University, who wrote books can be broken broadly into two classes, those written to please the reader and those written for the greater pleasure of the writer. Subject to numerous and distinguished exceptions, the second class is rightly suspect, and especially if the writer himself appears in the story. Doubtless, it is best to have one's vanity served by others, but when all else fails, it is something men do for themselves. Political memoirs, biographies of great business tycoons, and the annals of aging actors sufficiently illustrate the point. The italics are mine. I apologize for the ensuing name-dropping. It was hard to avoid it. People in my profession who, like myself, have the good fortune to parlay a minimal talent into a long career find all sorts of doors open that would otherwise have remained closed. Once behind those doors, it makes little sense to write about the butler if Chairman Mao is sitting down to dinner.
Give us, and where was he?
Oh, David Niven, Cap Ferrat.
Yeah. There you go. Cool. I mean, it's all part of it.
Well, as David Niven would say, that about rounds it off. Huge thanks to Rupert for helping us to fulfil a long-cherished ambition, and to our producer Tess Davison for pouring.
Pouring us drinks.
I wish.
For polishing our voices into this gorgeous oral luster that you are listening to.
If you want show notes with clips, links and suggestions for further reading for this show and the 224 that we've already recorded, please visit our website at backlisted.fm. If you want to buy the books discussed on this or any of our other shows, visit our shop at bookshop.org and choose Backlisted as your bookshop. And we're still keen to hear from you on X, Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, and wherever else you feel compelled to write from.
If you want to hear Backlisted early and ad-free, subscribe to our Patreon, www.patreon.com/backlisted. Your subscription brings other benefits. You subscribe at the lock listener level for significantly less than the cost of an old-fashioned upstairs at Romanoff's. You get not one, but 2 extra and exclusive podcasts every month. Locklisted features the 3 of us talking and recommending the books, films and music we've enjoyed in the previous fortnight. For those of you who enjoyed our What Have You Been Reading slot, that's where you'll now find it. It's an hour of tunes, musings, superior book chat. Plus, lot listeners get their names read out, accompanied by flashings of praise.
I think we would be remiss if, on this special occasion, we didn't ask Rupert to read out the listener names. I've got them here.
Yes, come on then.
Would you... So listen, everybody. These 10 people are having their names read out. Thank you so much.
Brilliant idea.
Trisha Chapman.
Hey.
Cindy Brito.
Thank you.
Anne Kindelera.
Thank you.
Okay.
James Thorpe.
Thank you, James.
Julia Mastroberry.
Marvellous.
Oh, thank you.
Amy Lawson.
Thanks, Amy.
Catherine Martone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Claire Boffey.
Yes.
You're making these names up. David Melchior.
And then?
A-Marie B.
A-Marie B.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, I would be disappointed if you haven't built your part up there. well, thank you very much.
Now, am I getting these 2 books as my payment? I can't
You
wait.
certainly are, yes.
Oh,
have we got anything? Oh, yes, Rupert, there's one last question I want to ask you. Is there any last thought, comment, nugget, observation about David Niven or about these books that we weren't able to cover in the main show that you would like to leave us with?
Well, I just think for me, the glamour of him in Switzerland, Roger Moore coming to visit, Noel Coward, and the wonderful, the tragedy of his illness, and I just adore the whole thing of the 1930s in Hollywood, and I wish I'd been there.
Okay,
really.
Okay.
Yeah. There's one. He's so good at stories. He can even do what I would have thought be the most dangerous thing in the world, which is to steal a story from someone else. And there's a little bit towards the end where Noel Coward. He says Noel Coward had 27 godchildren. Can you just read this little bit there that's in blue? It's a bit of Noel Coward.
Oh, yes. Uncle Noel, look at those 2 little doggies. What are they doing? The little dog in front, said Godfather Noel, has just gone blind and his friend is pushing him all the way to St. Dunstan's. That's very good. Yeah, that's a famous one. But that is, I think he's that's a famous story. Maybe he made the story famous.
But it's hard to know, as you say. You know, a lot of the lines that you get in this book do feel like they've been around forever.
Well, I have so enjoyed the last hour or so. Thank you, Rupert.
Thank you for having me. Thank you very much.
Glorious. Charm. It's marvellous. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for listening. Thanks, Tess, for looking after us. And we'll see you next time.
We'll be back in a fortnight.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Every 2 weeks?
Yes.
Oh, my God.